Back, and many thanks for staying with us here at Amka Bizz. But before we dive into our conversation of the day, I want to remind you that I can plug you actually to an event this coming Saturday, the 19th July 2025. K24 will bring you a live coverage of the Professional Fighters League, famously known as PFL, matches for the 2025 series starting 5 p.m. PFL Africa will unleash the continent's fearless warriors, raw talent and unmatched pride. That will be happening this Saturday, the 19th July 2025. This is more than winning the belt. Nkosi Ndebele versus Mohamed Atef. Well, you don't have to miss this. You have to be there. So it will be happening this Saturday, the 19th of July, starting 5 p.m. And now back to our conversation today. We are turning our focus today on what's happening in the petroleum sector. And my curiosity has really driven me to the contribution of the petroleum sector to the country's GDP. How is its contribution from your expert's perspective?
Okay, the petroleum sector is important in Kenya. It might not be as big as in Kenya as it is in other economies like Nigeria. It might not be as big, and the contribution might be around 1% to the GDP. However,
1%?
Yeah, to the GDP, around there. But what you cannot do is to look at it as its contribution only. When you look at the contribution from the sector to the government revenue was around upwards of 250 billion, and this is in the taxes collected from that particular sector. While that is the case, you look at it in contribution in other ways, in both in the direct and indirect aspect. The petroleum sector will employ a number of people and provide some reprieve to the economy in that way by providing employment, both directly those are employed at this within the sector, and also indirectly through the employment to other. If you walk to a petrol station right now, there's someone employed there, and then in this petrol station there is probably a small there's a kiosk right about around there. There is a shop there. So when you look at the impact on it, you look at it broadly, then look at the contribution of the petroleum sector into the supply and production of electricity in the country. It's still very prominent, and these are things that they might not contribute a lot to the GDP in themselves, but they form a very important pillar on the economy. And the activities that happen within the economy and the support function.
And you know, oil marketers or oil marketing companies have always been termed as the weakest link when it comes to collection of taxes within the sector. Are there leakages or inefficiencies in tax collection from these oil marketing? Would you attribute this low collection or contribution to the GDP? I mean, 1% to the country's GDP. What is the weakest link?
So one of the things that affects the country as a general, and not only the petroleum sector, is an issue of non-compliance. Really, you find very few people comply at all, and that's why you'll find there are a lot of audits by the Revenue Authority to try and force people to pay taxes. So that could be an aspect, but it would not be unique to the petroleum sector. It is something that is facing most sectors in the country. What we have seen the government do, and the shift now, even in this Finance Act that was recently released, is that the government is now moving from increasing taxes to trying to broaden the tax base. So what they want to do is now, when you walk to a petrol station and you pay, then the petrol station is expected to give you a compliant, what we are calling ITIMS, has been a very heated discussion as well, an ITIMS compliant invoice. That means for you to be able to claim this expense in the context of a company, you need to have this ITIMS compliant invoice. And what that basically does is that it transmits the information to KRA, that when you demand for it, they then have to give it to you, and that
as a refund.
No, not as a refund. When I demand for an ITIMS compliant invoice at the petrol station, they have to give it to me. So the government or the KRA learns that they made a sale. So if everyone was to really do that, then all the sales that they are making are then transferred to the government, and then at the end of the year the government is looking at, this is what you have submitted as, because you operate a self-assessment regime. That means I look at my business, I assess my taxes, I tell KRA this is how much I have profit I've made, this is how much tax I should pay, and you pay that. Self-assessment regime. Then KRA then has the right to come after and tell us that, and tell you that you declared that you made 100 million profit, and you declared that your sales were 200 million, but when we look at what has been transmitted is 300. How do you explain that? So that is what the government is pushing to do now, force compliance, not only to the petroleum sector, but throughout. But one of the things that you will you realize, especially with the many indirect taxes and the levies that have been put on the petroleum sector, the government actually could be making more money from those indirect than the corporate income tax, which is the direct tax, and the pay as you earn from the petroleum sector. Yes.
No wonder you're saying we don't look at it from one aspect, but we look at it broadly.
Broadly, yes.
But still on the question of the weakest link in this particular sector, in the petroleum sector, because, well, the government would expand their tax base in this particular sector. What would you cite as the weakest link? Aside from the compliance from this, oil marketers or industry players, because like you've said, a lot of money actually comes from these other ways as opposed to corporate tax.
So one of the things, and is a reality in the petroleum sector, it is capital intensive. So to look at the weakest link, and you need to look at it, you need to really identify, I'm looking at the weakest link from what angle? Is it the weakest link from the fact that the industry is not growing? Is that the angle I'm looking at it? Is it from the angle of the contribution to the GDP? Is that the angle I'm looking at it? Is it from the angle of funds or taxes remitted to the government? Is that the angle I'm looking at it? So when you look at compliance, that you're looking at it from an angle of contribution to the government in terms of taxes and levies and all that. Then when you come and look at it from this other angle now of a percentage to GDP, one of the issues that players within the petroleum, from the petroleum sector have been raising is that the margins are not as good as they would want them to have. I was reading an analysis yesterday on the difference, the growth in the margins for both for distributors and the players within the sector, and from 2024, May of 2024 to now May of 2025 has grown by 5 shillings. You could attribute it to inflation, but probably that is something we need to look at deeply and see. Could that be a source of inefficiency in itself? Yeah.
And we have seen some changes in the shilling as well. Shilling to dollar. Do you think these might even exacerbate this pricing further?
Yeah, definitely. If the forex exchange issue comes into play now, that has a direct impact, a very significant impact. You remember when the dollar was going for 160 Kenya shillings, at that point the fuel was upwards of 200 Kenya shillings, because we buy fuel in dollars. So that definitely affects. And one of the, going back to what we are saying, that there should be some policy that protects the citizen from feeling the impact of the dollar. If the dollar was to go up by 3 shillings in the next cycle, and then give a little bit of maybe the situation in the Middle East does not improve, so the distribution costs also increase, we could see an increase on the fuel come August 14th. So that there is a challenge, is a problem, yeah.
So Kenyans should brace themselves to dig deeper into their pockets to pay for this.
If the dollar,
shilling
if the shilling continues to weaken against the dollar. If it does, then there will definitely be a problem with fuel, and then fuel trickles down to many other things. The dollar has been stable for some time now, which has been very good, but those 1 shilling, 2 shilling, if they increase every other day, over time they add up, and then the impact gets
what
to
then,
the common mananchi.
What then are other factors that might trigger the price volatility as well?
So right now, the thing to look out, one of the things that we hope and do not expect is more taxes on that, or more levies on fuel. We really hope that doesn't come up, because if that comes up, that draws us up. But assuming the prices and the levies and the taxes on fuel remain as they are, the only other thing that would affect that then will be the market at the global the global prices, and these then are dependent on a lot of things. These are dependent on the geopolitical situation around Iran and Israel. Then there are other policies that might be made by, argument's sake, the Trump administration that then directly affect the global market, affects the prices. And as we have established right now, there is no flexibility to absorb these changes at the global level to shield Kenyans. So if these things were to happen, on top of now the dollars, then the prices could go up. And even speaking about the dollar, the government, with the borrowing made, or the funds raised by Kenya Roads Board, the 175 billion shillings, the government has been mentioning that we are going to borrow domestically or locally. Is it by virtue of it's expensive to borrow externally and that they are trying to tame the debt, or by the fact that we are high risk, and most of the rest of the countries that used to give us loans, give us loans, are no longer willing to? So there is an aspect that markets that were giving us loans 2, 3, 4 years ago are not now giving us as high loans, and one of these is China. China is no longer giving as big loans as they were giving. You see, they would fund development directly in form of the loan and fund development directly. So that is not happening, and we have also seen one of the other things that is critical is this aid. You see, we would depend on appropriation of aid to finance some of the things within our government. So that also has reduced. So, and taxes has also gone down. So then the government only has 2 sources of income. Is either they tax the people or they borrow. If the taxes are not forthcoming, then need to borrow. Then the issue comes in if they're not able to get funds from externally. They are left only with the option of then borrowing internally, and then there are these discussions with the borrowing from World Bank and IMF, which then also want to have they would want to see some controls being put in place, or some way to assure them that the the economy or the government is going to be able to repay their taxes. And you'll see, and then where they get that because of the what would we call it, of the temperature in the country, so they are not able to accommodate those tax losses, then those organizations might be reluctant to give loans to the government, because looking at it, government looking to borrow 550 billion Kenya shillings in this financial year domestically. That in itself is
but what are the risks? What are the risks when they decide to move to domestic borrowing?
So then that means government is competing with, or private businesses are now competing with government for borrowing. And given the risk profile, and the government would be considered by commercial banks to be less risky. And therefore, if they will go to, commercial banks will give credit to government at the expense of private businesses. So what we are likely to see in that case is that the private businesses don't have as much access to credit as they would have loved. And you see now credit is what would fuel business growth and make investors be able to invest in a certain capacity. So that then affects the economic growth in the country.
What then should be immediate policy interventions to tame this and to spur the economy at the same time?
I think that is a very delicate question, and I think that is what the government probably is agonizing over. How do we spur economic growth? How do we fund our operations of the business? How is the government able to repay the loans that are existing? How does it balance this? One of the things that would be important for the policy in the policy structure within the country is really to separate policy and politics, because one of the things that
but will they do that?
That now
that's a thin line between policy and politics.
Is a thin line, because probably some policies that the government has introduced would have been very good or are very good, but the looking around it and the way even the public perceives them is based on who is saying this. And when the government does this, everyone is looking at who is the source or originator, who is pushing this agenda, other than looking at how does this help the country. One of the things that we'll appreciate, and one of the issues that were being raised last year, is we pay a lot of attention on the tax part, how the government is looking to get the money in. That's why we are talking about, the government is looking at borrowing, the government is looking at increasing this tax or increasing compliance. Then there is also some need to look at where is the government spending the money that it's getting, so that then the activities that the government is spending the money in are anchored towards promoting economic growth and at a certain rate. That is now very important. That would be the important thing to look at.
And even as we are looking about Kenya, does this situation that Kenya is right now with the price hikes, how is the relation with the rest of the EAC nations? Because I know when it comes to taxation, there is push for harmonization of taxes, but then Uganda relies on Kenya when they want to transport their fuel. Yet when you get to Uganda, the fuel there is quite affordable. What then should be done to even ensure that there is this harmonization of this particular taxes? Are we any close to this?
Now, harmonization of taxes is a delicate issue, especially within the East Africa community, because one, every country is funding its own budget, and every country has the issues it's struggling with on that. And if we were even to look at fuel, which is very important statistics right here. So Kenya, the petrol is going at 186, diesel at 172, Kenya. In Uganda, petrol is going at 182, diesel 170, Kenya shillings. These in Kenya shillings terms. Then Rwanda, the petrol is going at 163 Kenya shillings, diesel at 159. Rwanda is even further.
Yes.
Then the petrol is significantly cheaper there. When you look at Tanzania, petrol is going at 143. That is 43 shillings cheaper in Tanzania, just down here.
The same shilling we are using, with the Tanzanian
that
shilling?
Is Kenya shillings. These have been converted to Kenya shillings. And this was now as at 15th of this month. Should be beginning of this week. Then Ethiopia, interestingly, Ethiopia petrol is going for 116 Kenya shillings. Now that is 70 shillings cheaper. So the taxes in Ethiopia are of course lower on the petroleum. So when you look at these factors, and considering that these are countries that are also not producing fuel, petroleum, so what we need to look at is what is informing this. And for the most part, taxes play a big role on it. And the question on whether harmonization could happen would be ideal, but now that remains to be seen.
Well, then Kenya has the highest in the East African nations. What would be your recommendations in regards to this, especially when it gets to the big margins that the country has compared to the rest of the EAC nations?
So the recommendation here, and you look at what is driving the big margins, taxes. So the question then comes is, can the taxes on fuel in Kenya be reduced? Because you wouldn't talk about distribution cost here, because the petroleum being sold at 182 shillings in Uganda has passed through the country, has passed through Kenya. So distribution evidently is not the issue. Then the issue really only is taxes and the levies on this fuel. Probably that is what needs to be looked at. And you see now in Kenya, reign of fuel, there is also VAT in fuel, and that was one of the things that had for some time had reduced or had made up for, was making a big, or was trying to bring our prices to at par with the region. But now with fuel, with VAT, the price also shot up.
Well, we are yet to see what really happens within the sector, but I'm also curious to know what is the thinking of the government when it comes to when they're policy making. When you look at the policies in place in this particular sector, do you think they are favorable, especially when it comes to how it will reflect back to the common mwananchi?
So you see, the intention behind EPRA is to protect the mwananchi and these price reviews and the margins, the controlled margins within the sector. That is the intention of the policy. But now, one of the things that you will notice, there is a lot, and there's an important question that you asked, is EPRA independent from government influence? And could government be looking at EPRA as a way of raising taxes? That then becomes an important question. Then what is the role of EPRA? Is it targeted to help the government achieve revenue targets, or is it main
to regulate?
To regulate. In the regulation part of the sector, it's doing very well in regulation. So on this other part on taxation and the impact on the price, you see, the regulation, you'll find most Kenyans are, of course, they are concerned about the safety and all those things. But what we are even discussing today is the price. We are not looking at those many other things. So EPRA is doing good on those other things. This one that touches the mwananchi's pocket is the one where a lot of attention then is being paid, and probably there could be a feeling that there is some level of influence from the government. Yes.
What would be your final feedback, especially looking at it from a tax perspective, looking at the collections made from this sector, recommendations in regards to what the sector really has to offer?
So my response to that would actually be broad, and look at it from, when you look at taxation in general, there are few things that are specific to the petroleum sector and that sector in general. one of the things that would be very important is to have some level of stability.
Yeah.
Such that an investor or even you as a person can anticipate that the price of this thing is unlikely to significantly change, so that you don't start, for argument's sake,
kwenye majukwaa tofauti.
Mimi ni Fatma.